The pilgrim seized between breaths. Sister Maud dropped the basin and shoved her hand into the wet linen to steady him. Suspicion guided Maud's hands as she peeled back the bandage and found a dark, sticky stain spreading like a stain on wool. Thomas coughed and spat, eyes gone glass, bright, and Maud called for help without taking her hands off him. In the first moments she smelled burned herb and something metallic under the simpler sense of broth and beeswax. Sister Maud moved with a rhythm learned from long nights. She had been born to a village close to the monastery and apprenticed at the infirmary when she was 14. She kept salt for wounds in a little linen pouch at her waist and a small herb bag tucked beneath her apron. Maud's work began before supper and ended at the last prayer. Tonight, she was on the late round, carrying a woven basket of clean bandages and a linen, wrapped pot of warm broth. Anselm came at her shout, hands at his sleeves. He did not run. Brother Anselm's steps measured the way he always measured questions. He crouched, checked Thomas' pulse, and lifted the bandage to see the same dark smear that had set Maud's suspicion into motion. Maud kept her voice steady. Brother Anselm, look, the poultice, it's gone hard and the bandage is stained. He cried, it burns. Anselm's face tightened. He tasted the edge of alarm and folded it back into authority. Anselm, hold him steady, Maud. His hand went to the wooden rosary at his belt while his other fingers pressed along Thomas' jaw. Maud breathed as she worked. The ward smelled of linen, sweat, and the low smoke of tallow. The ward lights were dim. Candle hallows at each bed, a thin path of lamplight beside the easel. Outside the high window, the sky was an even black. The problem showed itself in a small jar and a torn scrap of plant. The stakes were clear. If the remedy had failed, others could fall. Maud's suspicion shifted into a sharper knot when she found the half-used jar stacked with the evening supplies. The label was gone. She traced the lip of the jar with a finger and felt a grit of something brittle. She opened it. A dry powder rose and smeared her fingers. She tasted a faint bitterness. Maud's hands trembled slightly. She set the jar down and wrapped Thomas' wound with a fresh bandage from her basket. Thomas murmured a name between breaths, chest, Herb's chest. They moved to the foot of the ward where the medicine chest stood locked. Anselm found the key in the hook above the small table, then paused and glanced at Maud. Where did you last see the chest sealed? Maud answered after evensong. I stacked the tins and wrapped fresh bundles. I saw Edda pass the doorway later, carrying a tray. The mention of Edda tightened Anselm's face. Novice Edda had been clumsy, eager, and recently placed to assist in sorting herbs. The mention was a direction and a worry. They opened the chest. The smell of dried lavender, crushed mint, and powdered roots rose like a memory pressed into cloth. One jar gave ash when Anselm lifted its lid. Among the neat bundles, a small, foreign plant had been tucked between the sage and plantain. Its leaves were thin, pale, and brittle in a way none of them recognized. Maud touched the bundle and felt teeth marks at the stem. She glanced up. Bite marks, she said. She did not call them a metaphor. She named the exact shape. Crescent tears and chafed fibers. Anselm, a suspicion moved to a decision. He ordered the chamber sealed. Seal the chest, he said. He spoke to Edda when she arrived, palms empty and eyes wide. Edda, where did you get that spare bundle? Edda's answer came short and rushed. I put it there when I could not tell the route. I found it by the service stair. I thought to hide it until Brother Anselm could see. Her voice grew small. I only meant to keep it safe. Maud watched Edda's hands. They were small and knotted, where she had once carried a basket of mushrooms for the refectory. Edda's face reddened, and she confessed further. She had seen a pale animal slip between the rafters at dusk. She had not named it at first, because she feared being scolded for leaving the chest unlocked the evening before. The confession changed the shape of Maud's fear. Suspicion had been aimed at a failed remedy. Now it pointed toward movement through the rooms. Maud climbed the narrow stair to the herb loft. The loft was low and practical, Rows of bundles hung from rafters, a rough bench for sorting, a ladder fixed to the far wall. She guided herself by touch and the light of a single lantern. Her hands knew the scent of each herb before her eyes could confirm it. She touched rosemary, then yarrow, then a cluster of dried mugwort. One bundle gave off a faint, powdery dust when she handled it. She found bite marks along the stems and a pale trail of powder leading toward a narrow service stair. She followed the powder down. It had fallen in a neat thin line across the flagstones, a breadcrumb path of powder and small scales. At the foot of the stair, the cloister wind moved a loose scrap of parchment. The porter was there, doing his rounds with a broom across the stone. Maud called, "Porter, did you see anyone pass this way?" He stopped, pushed up his hat, and told them plainly he had seen a pale shape slip between the shadow and the wall at dusk, a pale shape with small feet. He said, "I thought it a rat at first, Sister Maud." It moved like something used to stairways. The detail gave them a new image to test. Anselm frowned. He did not accept the word rat without inspection. He and Maud walked with the porter back toward the storeroom. Maud's hands touched jars and bundles as they passed. She found a stray leaf in a broom corner. It matched the unknown plant. The porter said it left scratch marks by the latch. Not a rat, something larger. Or something with hands. Edda listened and covered her mouth. Her admission earlier now felt both careless and fearful. Maud's alarm rose like heat along her spine. They returned to the ward. The ward hummed with low, shallow breaths. Thomas slept with a thin dampness at his temple. A second patient named Goodwin sat up suddenly and clutched his throat. His hand found a torn poultice and dragged at it. He began to choke. The sound split the air. Maud dropped to him and pressed her fingers to his lips. Anselm made a quick decision and grabbed the other poultice off the tray, wrenching it open and flinging the contents into a basin. A light powder rose and stung their eyes. Anselm barked, "Water!" Maud poured and splashed cool broth and then clear water across Goodwin's mouth. She worked methodically, scraping the poultice from his face and throat. Goodwin's breath came ragged. He coughed and then went limp. Maud wrapped a fresh bandage and held his hand until color returned to his fingers. Thomas' breathing steadied. The ward no longer smelled like simple tallow and herbs. It smelled of iron and dust and burnt root. The moment in the center of the night was the chapter's sharpest risk. Anselm moved with hands that had done this work for decades. He ordered every bundle and jar collected and burned in the courtyard. He set 2 novices to watch the gate, and 1 to stand with the porter by the storeroom. He marked each bed with a small white thread to note which patients had received which poultice. Maud moved through the beds delivering warm broth and mending pulled stitches. Her movements showed her alarm without explanatory speech. She worked fast. She hummed softly to steady her hands, and she touched each forehead with the back of her wrist. "Maud, Thomas, can you tell me where the poultice came from?" Thomas opened his eyes. He pointed with a shaking finger toward the herb chest. Maud chest. "Smell like iron, like smoke before I slept." He paused, lips dry. "I remember a shout in the cloister. Someone, not tonight." Then a scraping over the beams. His words were small pieces of a memory, concrete and raw. A shout, a scrape. Anselm listened and then asked Edda directly, "Edda, did you open the chest tonight?" Edda answered, "I did. I thought it was safe. I only wanted to mix a milder salve. I found a root I do not know and I used it because the elder roots were gone." The answer shifted the direction of blame and guilt. Edda's confession was not a tidy end. I thought to make something less bitter for the children in Ward 3. I thought a softer root would help them sleep and eat. I did not mean to harm." Her hands twisted the hem of her tunic. Maud touched Edda's shoulder. "Edda, why did you not tell Brother Anselm?" "Maud?" Edda looked away. "I feared I would be sent from the infirmary. I feared the scolding more than the change. The fear was small and human. It shifted the emotional load from an abstract failing to a clear, avoidable act." Anselm made a decision then that spoke of his balance. He did not strike or shout. He ordered the storerooms sealed and the herbs inventoried. He chose to quarantine the ward and to burn the suspected poultices, but he also asked Maud to sit with Edda while he spoke to the abbot. Maud felt the tension change under her ribs. Suspicion had become responsibility. She nodded and guided Edda to a bench. Outside, the cold light of dawn brushed the high window while smoke threaded up from the courtyard pyre. Anselm moved through the ward counting losses and checking names. He opened his satchel and felt with the tips of his fingers for the rosary beads he kept to steady himself. One bead was missing. He paused, ran his thumb along the string, and then looked up slowly. He did not speak the thought aloud. The missing bead was a small fact. It made him uncertain in a way he did not show. Maud hung a new bundle of clean herbs by the latticed window. She tied each stem with rough twine, knot by knot. She set the bundle where the morning light hit it first. She traced the braid of the twine with a finger and felt the fibers real and honest under her thumb. Anselm found her there. He stood at the threshold with the sealed chest behind him and said, "We will inventory every jar. We will write the changes down." "We will keep watch," Maud answered. "I will watch the storeroom tonight." "Brother Anselm," her voice was steady again. The choice made the fear practical. They questioned the porter in the cloister after breakfast and got a clearer description. He had seen a pale figure slip between the shadows at dusk. He described small hands and a quick step. The image suggested a person or an animal that used doors like hands. The porter also mentioned the sound of a small bell, which he assumed was a child's toy, near the herb loft. That detail moved Anselm to a plan. To set watch in the loft and to place salt in corners where the powder trail had gathered. The investigation took the rest of the morning. Maud found one more scrap of the foreign plant behind a loose flagstone near the pantry. It had a faint scorch at the edge, as if it had been dried too quickly near a hearth. She called Anselm. He came and examined the scrap with a wooden spatula. He tasted a grain on the spatula and then set it down. His expression gave nothing away. He only burned the rest. Record who took what and who had access. By midday they assembled the novices and the porter in the infirmary. Anselm spoke plain. "We will not let this pass as accident. We will track who touched the chest and what left the chest. Edda, you will help me inventory. Maud, you will oversee the ward tonight. Porter, you will lock the outer door at dusk and open it only for the bell." Edda's head bowed. She had moved from panic to a small resolve. Maud felt a new shift. Alarm softened into care-driven determination. In the afternoon, a new discovery reshaped what they knew. A patient from the men's quarters whose bed they had marked with white thread had woken and spoken of dream visions. He described seeing a woman in the rafters, paler than the moon, who dropped a small packet through a chink in the wood. He named no person. He described the scent of burned root. The detail contradicted the idea of simple spoilage. It suggested deliberate action or a hidden hand. Maud and Anselm exchanged a look. They had moved from suspicion to alarm, and now to a cautious theory. Either someone had tampered with supplies, or a creature had nested in the rafters and mixed herbs among the stored bundles. The twist changed how they treated Edda's confession. Edda had acted out of fear and care, but she had also opened the chest. Her action had mattered. The new detail asked them to look above and beyond human error. That night, they held the ward tighter. Anselm posted a novice at the loft ladder. Maud sat by Thomas and fed him broth. She kept the blanket tucked and watched the slow rise of his chest. When she moved, she kept her voice low and concrete. "Thomas, can you hold this cup?" He took it and steadied it with both hands. He drank and blinked. "Thank you, Sister Maud," he whispered. Her hands warmed his fingers with the back of her wrist. The action soothed them both. At the deepest hour, a second patient collapsed. Goodwin's poultice tore and a faint dust rose. The ward erupted into controlled chaos. Anselm acted fast. He ordered the burning of poultices and a quick purge with vinegar and water. Maud held a basin under Goodwin's chin and swept powder from his lips. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small spoon of salt she kept for stitches. She poured a thread of salt water along the edge of the pillow. Her hands did not shake now. The fear had become practiced motion. During the purge, Maud found a torn ribbon caught beneath a mattress. The ribbon was frayed and blue, the same faded blue as a servant's sash. Edda had no sash. The porter had a cloth of darker tone. The ribbon suggested a visitor or a night worker who moved with access. Maud gave the ribbon to Anselm. He folded it and placed it in his palm. He did not speak. His silence said that this new evidence mattered. Dawn came with a solemn sky. The fire in the courtyard had taken the worst of the poultices. The list of harmed patients was short. None had died. Anselm had closed the ledger and counted losses. He opened his satchel to take out his rosary. His fingers searched for a bead he carried to steady his breath. One bead was missing. He turned the satchel over and tapped the lining. He held the strap between his teeth and looked up at Maud. "One bead is gone," he said. He did not call it omen. He named it as a precise fact. Maud hung a single new bundle of herbs by the latticed window where the first light touched the leaves. She swept clean the shelf and tied the twine twice. "Anselm, will the ward sleep now?" Maud answered, "They will sleep with watchful hands. We will keep the storeroom sealed, and we will write the names of those who enter." Anselm nodded and looked at the jar of ash burned that morning. He set the scrap of blue ribbon beside it. He slid the sealed chest key into his palm and tightened his grip. They had resolved the immediate danger. They had burned the poultices and tended the ill. They had questioned Edda and the porter. They had found evidence that suggested someone had moved through the rooms at dusk, and that a misused route had caused harm. The chapter closed on a small, concrete thread left untied: the missing rosary bead, the frayed ribbon, and Edda's confession. Maud held the bundle near the window and felt the light warm the stems. She tied the last knot, and Anselm turned the key in his pocket once more before he left the ward to report to the abbot. Maud set the bundle in the corner and said aloud, "We will watch." Anselm's last sight before the door closed was a single bead, shaped hole in his rosary, and a young novice sitting very still, hands folded, learning what care cost when remedies failed. Sister Maud overturned the basket and dried leaves slid across the flagstones. One bundle stuck to the wood, dark and glossy where oil had pooled. Suspicion tightened her hands as she set each bundle down. The stain did not look like old resin or water. She called for a light and probed the smear with her finger, tasting nothing but bitter ash on her tongue when she licked a fleck by habit. The storeroom smelled of straw, beeswax, and the long, swept dust of midday, not of burnt cloth. In those first moments, suspicion drove Maud to check every shelf and every jar she had touched that day, and that doubt would govern every step she took that night. She moved through the low beam of the storeroom with a quick, precise rhythm. Her braid swung against her back as she set bundles in neat rows and turned each one to find the extent of the stain. A scrap of blackened linen lay near the mortar and pestle where she mixed salves earlier. She picked it up with 2 fingers and held it under the lantern. The cloth had a singed edge and a small stitch in a thread that was finer than the monastery's ordinary linen. Maud frowned, tightened her lips, and wrapped the scrap in a scrap of clean muslin. She knew the work table. She knew what dried mugwort and plantain looked like. This did not belong. She carried the wrapped scrap into the ward and did not knock. The ward was low, ceilinged, a long room with beds set along both sides. Candles guttered in small glass cups, and the air held the sound of shallow breaths and the smell of broth. Brother Anselm stood half-turned by a patient's bed, face a lined map of care. Maud held up the bundle and the scrap without dramatic flourish. She showed it the way a midwife shows a newborn's hand. The thing itself had to speak. Anselm, Maud. Her voice had a clear, practiced calm. Brother Anselm glanced up, then took the bundle with his careful hands. His eyes traveled from the cloth to the patients' faces. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "Storeroom by the mortar." "The batch we finished at Vespers." Maud's fingers kept a steady grip on the wrapped scrap. She did not fold her hands. She kept them busy, moving them as if to steady a shaking loom. The way she worked gave form to her suspicion, small, deliberate gestures rather than accusations. They checked bandages. Sister Maud drew back linen at the elbow of an old tenant and found a dark, sticky stain beneath. Thomas the pilgrim coughed in his sleep and rolled his head. His palm brushed his chest where a bandage had been damp. Maud touched the damp and felt warmth and a tacky resistance on her fingers. Brother Anselm's jaw tightened, a brief, measured movement. He ordered that the affected beds be shown to him. They moved from bed to bed. Maud did not look at the faces so much as the linens, fresh stains, each with a similar sheen. A woman with a cough opened her eyes and saw Maud's hand at her wrist. She squeezed it without asking. "Sister," she said. "I dreamed the road burned." Maud gave a small incline of the head and pressed a cool cloth to the woman's forehead. Action, not speech. The ward filled with low, practical steps, bedsheets folded back, basins filled, pots moved closer to patients. The practical rhythm held back panic. Brother Anselm turned to Maud. "Which of the preparations used these bundles?" he asked. Maud listed the salves and poultices she had mixed earlier that day. She each named plainly: plantain salve, comfrey broth, crushed marshmallow root. The list landed like stones in a pool. Each required precise ingredients and careful heat. Anselm's voice narrowed. "Then someone added something else," he said. They went to the preparation table. The work surface had streaks of lard and old herb dust in the worn grooves. Maud ran her hand over the wood and found, half hidden in a knot, a smear of an unfamiliar resin, darker, glossier, sticky between her fingers. Her lips parted. She washed the smear on the table with boiling water and a rougher rag, scrubbing until a pale grain of burnt thread showed embedded at the edge. Maud's hand pulled back as if burned. The action betrayed her alarm more clearly than any sentence. "Who fed the fire this afternoon?" "Anselm, I did the fire. I measured the herbs. I mixed the base," Maud replied. Her name with attention, not defensiveness. She set down her tools and traced the route she had taken that day. Market, storeroom, ward, back to the work table. She each placed quickly like a list of pins on a map. Her movement was a way of proving the limits of her culpability and also finding the gap. For a long hour they checked the ledger. Maud read aloud the names of the incoming bundles and the small marks by the supplier's sigil. 2 deliveries had arrived that week. One from Dom Peregrine, an itinerant trader, and one from the monastery's own garden. The Dom's name had an unfamiliar flourish. Brother Anselm traced the ink and frowned. "We did not order stray editions," he said, and for the first time his voice bore the sharpness of worry. They returned to the ward. Thomas the pilgrim had been coughing through the night. He sat up when they entered and tried to touch his chest as if to gather his breath. Maud took the patient's hand in both of hers and found it warm and collused. Thomas' eyes were half closed but clear. "What is it, sister?" Thomas, and his voice was that thin, grateful whisper the monastery had taught them to quiet with broth and gentle hands. "We found a stain on some of the herbs." Maud. She did not offer broad words. She named the fact and nothing more. "We will check your bandage." She eased the knot and peeled back the linen, careful to keep her thumb from touching the contaminated edge. Thomas coughed and spat a small fragment onto the bedside pallet. A blackened scrap of cloth and a leaf that did not belong. Ma's breath stopped for only a count. She recognized the leaf from a trader's bundle she had seen once, a leaf that produced heat rather than cool when made into poultice. Her recognition narrowed her suspicion into a more precise worry. Substitution. Anselm leaned close. "Where did you pick this up on the road?" he asked Thomas. Thomas put a hand to his chest and tried to form the word. "By the inn at Y crossing, a man with a small brazier." I warmed myself there was soot. I thought my cloak caught a spark. His voice skidded to a cough. His fingers stroked the edge of the burnt scrap. He had coughed loose. Maud set the leaf on the table and examined it beneath a lantern. The surface had tiny hairs that prickled when she passed a fingertip across them. "This will not soothe a wound," she said. Her sentence was concise and carried the weight of diagnosis. She did not say the word poison. She said the concrete effect: "This warms and inflames." This new detail changed the night's course. The ward's pace shifted from methodical to frenzied practicality. Anselm barked orders with the precision of a man used to organizing care. "Isolate those beds. Fetch vinegar, hot water, a fresh basin. Tell the lay brother to damp the doorways. We must keep the ward from carrying this farther." His lines were quick and braced. They guided action rather than conjecture. Sister Maud moved through the tasks with a nervous steadiness. She filled basins, boiled water, and tore linen into strips while the others bound feet and wrists. She spoke to patients by name, 3 words at a time, soft but clear. When a man groaned, she steadied his shoulders and said, "Thomas, drink the broth." Thomas obeyed and murmured thanks. At the doorway, a young novice arrived with a tray and stopped short when Anselm waved him away. The novice's face went white. "Brother, Dom Peregrine left a braided packet at the gate before Vespers. He'd be carried to the women's side, but the porter put it on the infirmary table." The arrival of the novice was an external event that deepened the plot. Every 3 to 5 paragraphs such an event had to occur, and this time it came as a small, true pivot. Anselm took the description and hurried back to the storeroom with Maud at his heels. They opened the braided packet. Inside were leaves not from their fields, a foreign herb that smelled sharp and resinous, a scrap of charred cloth, and a strip of folded paper tied with a hair. The paper had no writing, only a dark smudge. Brother Anselm's face drew tight. "Who brought it through the gates?" he asked the empty room. Maud found her voice flat but quick. "The porter handled the outside arrivals this afternoon." A man stood at the gate with a bridle and a small brazier. She set down the packet and brushed the pile of herb dust aside. The basil and plantain for the day's poultice lay nearby, untouched. She had to stop herself from stacking them out of sight. Her hands were set on fixing harm, not avoiding it. The ward responded with movement. They moved the worst patients to a separate alcove and hung a crude cord across the doorway with a notice scribbled by Anselm's hand. Maud bound Thomas's wound more tightly and then hastily loosened it when the man flinched. They argued for a few quick lines over the best course. "Discard the whole batch or cleanse the worst wounds now." The exchange was terse. "If we throw everything away, Maud, those already soaked will keep festered in place. We must scrape and clean now." She spoke with the urgency of someone who sees immediate harm and wants to act. "If we scrape," Anselm countered, "we risk spreading infection with each peel. If the foreign herb bears fire, scraping may drive it deeper." His voice did not tremble. "It set the problem in starker terms. Then we clamp and clean the worst, and we burn the rest, Maud." The back and forth contained 3 quick exchanges. It was not a long quarrel, but an urgent negotiation. Their rapid reasoning guided the choice. A mix of both measures. Anselm agreed, and there was no theatrical surrender, only that economical nod of a man who weighs lives. They prepared. Maud knelt by Thomas's bedside under a single lantern. The light threw a small circle across his chest and the bed's straw. Her fingers trembled at the first pull of the bandage. She clamped her jaw and forced her hands steady. Anselm placed a wooden spoon with saline at Maud's elbow and watched her. His manner was measured. He did not take the work from her hands. "Thomas, breath hitched sister," he said. "Do what you must." His words were thin, not a plea, but acceptance. Maud worked with short, precise motions. Lift the linen, fold it back, press a finger to the edge of the wound. Scrape away the black film with the blunt edge of a spoon. Each action was brutal in its clarity, no metaphors, only the scrape and the small wet sound of separating grime. Thomas convulsed and Maud steadied his shoulders. She hummed a line of a prayer under her breath to keep her hands measured. At the table, Anselm warmed clean linen and poured vinegar into a cup. He held the lamp closer so Maud could see the wound's edges. The dark substance came away in thin sheets, and under it the skin was red and tender and bleeding in spots. Maud worked until her knuckles ached, until she could see pale flesh that had not yet given over to rot. Each removed sliver of cloth or singed thread they set into a tray for inspection. In the middle of the cleansing, Thomas began to choke and spat up a piece of blackened thread. He caught his breath and looked at Maud with eyes that held both fear and gratitude. "The inn, why crossing? He sold me a knot to keep warm. Thomas." His sentences came between coughs. Maud's hand tightened for a second and then loosened. She touched his brow and found fever. The touch, small and immediate, shifted her from methodical action to urgent tenderness. Her voice thinned as she said, "Rest. Rest now, Thomas." The emotional change, from suspicion to fierce protectiveness, moved in a single, concrete motion. She steadied his shoulder and refolded his blanket. They examined the removed material beneath the lamp. A burnt edge and a foreign stitch suggested the taint had come from an outside item, perhaps carried against a traveling cloth. Anselm turned the thread under the light and said, "This sew is not our work. The stitch is fine, not local. Someone's strap, a patched satchel, a trader's hand passed it on." That sentence narrowed the source and suggested a person, not simply spoilage. They held a brief council by the table. Maud recommended cleansing immediate wounds and burning the contaminated batch. Anselm tasked a young brother to guard the gate and note arrivals. They burned the contaminated herbs in a small pit outside, feeding them with sober, deliberate motion while candles guttered inside the ward. Anselm read a short prayer over the pit, not to call help, but to mark the act of eliminating danger. The ward watched and continued tending the weak. Outside, the smoke rose thin and acrid. The porter returned with the memory of a man who had lingered near the gate. A small brazier, a warm hand, a trader who offered heat to those who passed. The porter described the man's braid of herbs and his hasty step. He did not stay for a blessing, the porter said. He only wanted to keep walking. The porter's account became a concrete clue. Maud inspected the storeroom once more. The mortar had a nick she had not made and a smear of resin she had not mixed. She set a boiled cup on the table and dumped the mortar's contents into the wash. Her hands were steady, but her throat was tight. She wrapped the last clean bundle in fresh cloth and moved to sew a new label on the shelf. Each small act, sewing, washing, marking, was an anchor against the unease that had moved through her since that first smear. They bound Thomas again, and this time used fresh linen and a poultice drawn from their own garden. He flinched at the initial sting and then softened, breath evening. Anselm placed a hand on Maud's shoulder and said nothing. The silence was not comfortless. It was the monastery's way of acknowledging work done. Maud answered the pressure with a small nod and returned to cleaning a basin. Before dawn, Maud sat at the work table and opened the folded paper they had found in the packet. Inside lay a small, odd scrap of cloth embroidered in a stitch the monastery did not use and a leaf cut thin. She drew the edge of the scrap between her fingers and noticed a single, tiny mark. An inked symbol used by a trader had called himself Dom Peregrine. Her chest tightened again. Suspicion returned, but with a new angle. This was not simple spoilage. It hinted at exchange. Brother Anselm stepped into the storeroom and wrapped a rough cloak around his shoulders. He placed a small wooden rosary on the table and said, "We will post the beds in quarantine and ask the city guard to note anyone leaving the market with bundles similar to this." His plan was concrete and procedural. They had contained the immediate danger, but the cause remained unresolved. Maud tied the notice to the cord at the ward's alcove with a neat, exact knot. Her hands worked the rope, threading the twine through the corner so the notice would not fall. She looked over the ward once, toward Thomas's slow breath and the basin steaming at the table, and then she turned the key on the storeroom door with a slow, decisive twist. The chapter closed not on answers but on action taken. The contaminated herbs burned, Thomas steadied under fresh bandages, the porter's report filed, a guard tasked to watch the market. Maud folded the scrap of foreign cloth into the muslin and placed it in the monastery chest reserved for dangerous things. She did not speak a vow or a flourish. She only set the chest lid down and pressed her palm over it for a count, feeling the rough grain under her skin. The final sound was the small scrape of the notice cord as the wind moved it. It was a concrete, situational beat, the ward's door secured for quarantine, the cord creaking, a decision made and set into motion, ending the night with a careful, deliberate closure rather than a lingering question. Brother Anselm forced the wooden chest, and a strip of black oil ran like a thick vein across the inner lid. Suspicion tightened his hands before he lit the candle. The smell of rancid fat rose from the wood and made him cough. He set the rosary against his palm, kept one finger on the latch and worked the lid open to reveal bundles with dark rims and an absent jar clinking in the empty space. The immediate problem was simple and urgent. A remedy had been tampered with. That suspicion set every step he took for the night. He did not wait to wake the others with a soft knock. Brother Anselm carried the lantern down the corridor, the candlelight catching the patchwork of his habit. He moved without hurry, each footfall measured, and he called for Sister Maud at the ward doorway. "Sister Maud," he said, "come look." His voice held the single syllable order of a man who had steadied more than one panic. Sister Maud came with her hair-bound basket slung, a smear of basil dust still clinging to her thumb. "What is it, Brother Anselm?" she asked, leaning into the storeroom and frowning at the open chest. She stepped over the threshold and reached out, touching the oil with the pad of a finger, then drew back. She tasted it with a small look of professional caution. "It is not oil we use, Brother Anselm. Look along the seams. The jar is gone." He pointed with the rosary bead. Her gloved hand went to Thomas's name on the roster nailed to the wall. "Thomas received a poultice tonight," she said. Her voice thinned. The suspicion that had knotted Anselm's chest moved into her through the touch of the stained cloth. She set the basket down and found, as she always did, her hands steady. They lit a brazier and moved toward the ward. The ward smelled of boiled broth and damp straw. Thomas the pilgrim lay on the nearest pallet with his cloak folded at his feet. He coughed once, then watched them come with slow, grateful eyes. Brother Anselm crouched and checked the bandage again, pressing the edge with a finger. "Thomas," he said, "did someone bring you this tonight?" The pilgrim answered with a thin whisper, "A man at dusk. Tall cloak." He left a pouch and walked away quick. "Brother Anselm." Thomas' lips moved around the words. He coughed and then gave up the sentence in a ragged line. Said he sold oil that would warm a wound. He tried to sit and had to fold back down. He put a hand to his chest like a man feeling the march of a fever. Anselm looked at Sister Maud. Her hands were already unwrapping the bandage. She did not pause to say how she felt. She worked. Her movements spoke urgency. She pulled the linen back and showed Anselm the same dark smear they had seen in the storeroom. He pressed a small square of linen to the edge of the wound and watched the cloth take on that same black sheen. "We have more than one sick bed to check, Anselm." He sounded flat with worry. "Fetch 2 more lanterns. Move quietly. Do not wake the others unless needed." He left Sister Maud with Thomas and crossed the ward. The rows of pallets made a straight line like a list of names to be read. The second pallet he came to held a farmer whose breathing had been shallow all evening. Anselm peeled the bandage back. The farmer's wound gleamed where the poultice had been applied, and the skin around it was hot. The farmer hissed when the cloth touched his flesh. "What did you put on me?" He croaked when he saw Anselm's face. Anselm set 2 fingers to the farmer's wrist and found a pulse faster than it should be. He found confirmation of the spreading problem. Sister Maud returned from Thomas's pallet with a torn scrap in her hand. "Brother Anselm," she said, showing him the ragged edge of a stamped paper. This fell from Thomas's satchel. She flattened the scrap on her palm. The ink mark matched a merchant's mark she had seen at the riverside market. She closed her eyes for a breath and then pushed the scrap toward him. "Marjorie's stall. Anselm." He kept his voice low. "Bring me the roster. We go now." He moved with purpose. The suspicion that had first seized him sharpened into a push to action. He took the key from the hook by the door, an old iron thing with a loop worn by many hands, and they went out into the damp, prayer dawn. At the riverside market, Marjorie the herb seller had her wares arrayed in a neat, patient order. Jars sat lined on rough planks, their lids tight. She wore a shawl knotted at the throat, and she tended the jars with the care of someone who relied on reputation more than coin. When she saw Brother Anselm and Sister Maud approach, her fingers stopped on a ribbon of twine. "Marjorie, Brother Anselm, we found oil in our storeroom and a missing jar. We found this scrap with Thomas. Do you know these jars?" He unfolded the scrap and held the stamped edge up between them. Marjorie's mouth went thin. "Brother Anselm, I sold herbs all morning. I do not want trouble. If anything is wrong, I will answer for it." Her hands trembled at the edge of composure. Anselm watched her face for a sign she would lie. Sister Maud stepped closer and pointed. "Check the rims. Please, Marjorie, look at your lids." Marjorie obeyed. She took down a jar and turned it. A dark smear rimmed the glass like the stain on the bundles. Her breath left her in a small sound. "I can explain. Marjorie, I sold those jars full to a cloaked buyer at dusk this week. He paid more if I mixed in quick oil to stretch the stock. I did not want to, but the coin came heavy and the buyer left before dawn. I thought I could hide the shorting until I could clean the rims. I swear I did not mean harm." Her hands clutched at the cloth at her waist. The admission changed the direction of the night. This might be careless greed, not internal sabotage. Brother Anselm kept his face measured. "Who bought them?" "Describe him." He needed a name, a face, a place to put the suspicion. Marjorie's voice dropped to a frail thing, tall, cloak hood low, voice like river stones. "He paid with a small purse and demanded it be unlabeled. He left a token once, silver, carved with a loop, and I thought nothing of it until now." She looked at Sister Maud. "I am sorry. I was afraid of shamed gossip and to starve. If you can forgive who gave you the coin, Anselm," and the question was not meant for absolution. He kept language tight. Marjorie named no name. She only described a purchase and a hurried departure. They left the market with Marjorie's jars in a cloth sack. The market noise pressed around them, carts, a dog whining, but the two caregivers moved with the narrow focus of people who had found a cause and followed it. On the way back, Sister Maud fell into a steady cadence of questions. "Brother Anselm, if Marjorie lied, why would she name a buyer and pay coin?" she asked. "Why not swap the jar in front of us?" Her fingers rubbed her palm as she walked. A new shift of feeling moved through her, from suspicion to a threaded fear that someone had meant harm, because someone wanted the jars untraceable. Anselm. Because the jar could be linked if marked. Someone intended to pass it in a crowd and leave. Or someone paid Marjorie to do this, and she does not know their name. He did not say whom he suspected. His silence pulled at the answer. Back in the infirmary late that morning, they inventoried the jars and set fresh heat to the bandages in a cauldron. The farmer's fever rose and fell. Thomas' cough lingered. The storeroom remained sealed while Brother Anselm arranged for the jars to be tested by immersion and heat. At each check his suspicion changed shape. First a private doubt, then a public alarm, then a practical determination to limit harm. Midday brought a new twist. Sister Maud sat by Thomas and found a scrap of paper tucked in a seam of his satchel. A stamp with the same market mark, but a folded corner that showed a crest unlike any merchantess, an emblem of 2 crossed keys under a bird. She called Anselm with her breath caught. Brother Anselm, look at this, she said. This is not a merchant's seal, I know. See the bird. She handed the scrap to him. He traced the stamp with his finger, felt the raised ink, 2 crossed keys. He said aloud, that is a mark I have seen on small tokens before. Where did Marjorie say the buyer left? He pressed the corners of the scrap between his thumb and forefinger as if it were already a map. Sister Maud named an alley by the old mill. He went toward the river, she said. He walked like he knew the dark. He took the last boat, her voice thinned with worry. Anselm considered the river route and the hours of travel. He made a decision. They went to the alley by the old mill. The alley smelled of wet stone and the river's breath. It was the sort of place that kept secrets in the reeds. At the mouth of the alley, a child watched them, then darted away. Anselm crouched and found a small scrap of cloth stuck to a hook in the wall. It bore a faint thread of the same black oil. Sister Maud, he said, not as a question, check the docks. I will speak with the boatman. She ran, basket bouncing at her hip. He went the other way, toward the river moorings. At the mooring, a boatman named Jory squinted up at them. You look like you bring trouble, Brother Anselm, he said. What is it this time? He had a blunt voice and a blunt manner. Have you seen a cloaked man pay for a boat at dusk this week? Anselm, a man who came with a small purse and left quickly. He the words plainly. Jory spat into the water and pointed. Dusk last Wednesday. Tall cloaked one. Paid with little coin. Took the east boat. Left a silver token. I found it on the gangplank. I thought it a jest. He frowned. He wore a ring set strange. He did not say his name. He moved like a man who kept his back to the town. The man answered simply. Each sentence and action meant to be trusted. Anselm pressed for time. We need that token. Show me. The boatman produced a small silver disc with scratched lines and a bird carved faintly on the face. Anselm turned it under the light. The same bird as on the scrap glinted back. The arrival of the token redirected suspicion. It was no longer a merchant's mistake. The token tied the cloaked buyer to a network that left markers, and the pattern suggested deliberate supply, not random profit. The feeling in Anselm's chest shifted from suspicion to the sharp edge of alarm. He tightened the rosary in his hand until the beads clicked. They followed the river path until late afternoon. Along the wharf, faces watched from shutters. The cloaked man's steps had left oil on a plank and a smear matched the storeroom stain. The trail narrowed. Each small discovery, smear, token, a child's description, moved the feeling from private doubt into something testable. Sister Maud carried Thomas's satchel now and watched the river with a steady look. At noon a woman in the market had said one startling thing under the wash of voices. He goes to the cloister sometimes at dusk, like a man who has business with a brother here. She had not named any brother. That line lodged in Anselm's ear. If the buyer had ties to the monastery, then the problem was not only adulteration for coin. It might be deliberate. The thought lodged itself like a splinter. They returned before evening. Brother Anselm sat in the corridor outside the ward with the token on the table and the jars laid out in a row. He for 2 things. To keep watch through the night and to question anyone who had been near the storeroom. He assigned tasks with the steady authority of a man who had kept trusts before. Sister Maud paced with her hands folded under her apron. She hummed once, the small habit of concentration he had noticed from the first night. The humming steadied her. It helped her think. Late in the evening, when the lamps burned low and the ward slept with the breath of the sick like measured tides, the corridor held a sound that did not belong. A soft drag in the shift of cloth. Brother Anselm was at the doorway when a cloaked figure slipped back toward the storeroom with a slow intent. The man moved to a shelf, groped as though looking for something, and froze when the lantern light found him. Anselm stepped out. Stop, he said. Who are you? The cloaked figure turned, hands raised. For a moment the corridor took all its air into a single held beat. Sister Maud was behind Anselm now, hand on a bandage roll, ready. She called, "Brother Anselm." To anchor the moment, the cloaked man moved with a quickness that surprised Anselm. He lunged for a jar, then stumbled when Anselm caught his wrist. The two of them went to the stone, a small struggle of fabric and weight. Sister Maud moved in to help, hands reaching to pull the cloak free. The intruder fought in a thin, desperate way. "Let go, Brother Anselm." The intruder hissed. He pushed them away and tried to flee. Anselm shifted his weight and grabbed the cloak at the hem. The cloak fell open. Inside, a cord with a small carved token lay on the man's breast. The token was identical to the disc they had found. For one breath, the man looked past them with a face that carried a tired patience. He was not a stranger by trade, but a man with ties. Sister Maud cried out the name she saw on the token's carved edge. "Brother Martin," she said, and the sound caught like a stone in the moonlit water. The intruder's hood slipped, and the light found the rounded cheek, the day-old beard. A small cross of thread marked his robe, the mark of a lay brother attached to a priory south of the town. Anselm held him by the wrist. "Brother Martin," he said, "what have you done?" He spoke the name clearly to set it between them. The intruder's face crumbled and then hardened. He muttered no pure confession. Instead, he said, "They forced coin on me. I needed it for the novices. I thought I could send the jars and be done." He tried to make his chest fill with a defense. The corridor became a place of sharp, quick words. "Anselm, who forced you?" Brother Martin shook his head, his jaw set, not by name. "Men with cloaks and voices like river stones. They promised coin and supplies if I took a few jars on the road. I could bread the work with a handful of coin. I did not mean people should come to harm." His voice was small and raw. Sister Maud leaned forward and the rapid exchange turned like a knife. "Brother Martin, Thomas has the same stain. The farmer has it. People are worse for these jars. Did you hide the rims?" she demanded, the rapid back and forth was sharp and then soft. Brother Martin named no names. He offered only excuses and a cracked attempt at explanation. "You will sit in the infirmary. Anselm, you will not go to the kitchens. You will answer for every jar you handled." That was an order shaped to guard the sick. He added, softer, "Brother Martin, tell us what you know about the cloaked men." "Speak plainly." The man bowed his head and said the first concrete thing that shifted the case. "They meet at the old warehouse by the river at night. They speak of moving goods beyond the town. They are not men of faith." The admission pushed the danger outward. Anselm for details. Brother Martin listed times and a direction toward a warehouse with broken windows and a locked gate. As he spoke, the feeling in the room moved again. From suspicion to clarity, the clues threaded into a map. Marjorie Spire, the token, the smear on the planks, Brother Martin's admission. Together they formed a direction. They did not pursue the warehouse that night. Anselm put Brother Martin by the third pallet and assigned 2 lay brothers to sit with him under the watch of a bell. He instructed Sister Maud to make a clean poultice and to change every bandage at dawn. She did not argue. She moved with the steady economy of someone who has seen harm and chooses to repair it. Dawn came thin as water. The ward smelled of boiled herbs and steeping linen. The storeroom stood sealed. The affected beds had fresh dressings pinned with clean cord. Brother Anselm arranged the jars into a neat row on the table and set the token beside them. He lit a small candle and placed it between the jars and the token. He wrote down names and times in a tidy hand, not trusting memory. Sister Maud tended Thomas with a bowl of broth. He sipped and kept his eyes on the ceiling. When she wrapped the new bandage, she paused and looked at Anselm. "Will they come again?" she asked. Her voice held a small question, no dramatic flourish. She reached for the rosary he had put on the ledge and folded it into the linen. "We will watch. Anselm, we will seal the storeroom. We will set a guard at the corridor and keep the jars under lock. We will call the prior and ask for a quiet inquiry. We will tell Marjorie what we found, and we will speak to the men at the warehouse if they return. We do not know whether this was greed or a plan, But we know what has to be done. His sentences were worked out like tools. The urgency had shifted into a practical plan. The fear eased into method. Marjorie came at dawn with a wrapped bundle and a face that carried shame and a plea. "Brother Anselm," she said, "I will help. I will unmake what I did. Tell me what I can do to make right." She did not ask for forgiveness as a phrase. She offered labor. Anselm divided tasks. They cleaned and boiled bandages. They set new labels on every jar, and they wrote in a ledger each sale and each date. Brother Anselm instructed Jory the boatman to watch the boats, and to bring word at once if a cloaked man sought a boat. He sent a careful message to the priory that Brother Martin had been compelled to move jars. The priory replied with a messenger promising to come and speak with Anselm in person. The layers of contact made the problem wider. No one claimed absolute victory that morning. The infected were tended and some improved with the clean dressings and the small salves Sister Maud prepared. Thomas slept in a better breath after the bandage was changed. The farmer's fever dropped 1/2 a degree. Sister Maud moved like a woman who had worked the long-hour shift and who would continue. Each small recovery was a step away from the edge of harm. By late morning, Marjorie returned with names she had heard in market gossip. A trader who worked for a merchant company that skirted the town's regulations, a rope of men who bought goods to sell farther downriver. She did not know whom to name, but she named them repeatedly, because naming made her feel less like an accomplice. She named trades, not faces. She named routes. She closed her mouth with a thin sound when Anselm pressed. "Marjorie, will you stand with us and tell the prior what you know?" She nodded. In the afternoon, Anselm walked the corridor and found Brother Martin sitting very straight on a pallet, hands folded in his lap. He looked older than his cloth declared. Anselm sat and did not speak for a moment. The practical steps of the day had quieted the worst of the fear into a workable plan. "Brother Martin, Anselm, you men meet at a warehouse. That will be where we go next, if the prior agrees. You will come with us and show where. You will answer to the priory for taking jars. But first, help me make a list of every jar you handled." Brother Martin looked at the jars and spoke without flourish. He named dates and times. He read them like a ledger. When the prior arrived at dusk, he did not shout or pass immediate judgment. He came with a monk who took notes. He listened to Marjorie, to Brother Martin, to Anselm. He exacted questions and he ordered a quiet, formal inquiry. The prior's voice held the weight of the house. He assigned 2 lay brothers to accompany a small party to the warehouse the following night. The decision landed like a final, practical step. Night came with a measured set of plans. Anselm fastened the storeroom with a heavier lock and laid out the jars they would carry as evidence. He looked at Thomas and at the farmer and then at Sister Maud. "If we go to the warehouse, stay with the ward until we return," he said. "Tend the dressings and call the bell if anyone worsens." She nodded and set the bowl of broth down with a quiet hand. They went at first shadow, then sound. The warehouse waited with broken panes that held the moon like cold coins. The party moved with a slow order. The prior in front, a lay brother on either side, and Brother Anselm holding the lantern. Brother Martin came last, his steps a study of guilt and hope. Inside the warehouse they found stacked crates and jars and a small ledge where men had rested. The smell of old oil lingered. The moon found a splatter on a board, and the same black smear lay in a trail. They found a ledger, torn, but legible, tracking sales of jars to names that meant routes. The prior read it aloud. Each name belonged to a trader who moved goods past town rules. On the ledger's last page, a single note named a town near the priory's south gate. The discovery recalibrated what they knew. The ledger proved this was deliberate trade and not a single misdeed. The twist changed the scale from a market cheat to organized supply. Brother Martin's explanation fit into a pattern. They arrested no one in the warehouse. Instead, the prior closed the ledger and said, "We will bring this to the council at dawn. We will ask for peace and restitution." For now, we return and secure those we can. We will not make the infirmary a cause of more harm by striking alone." The prior's words were cautious and careful. They sent a messenger to the town authorities with the ledger copied. By dawn, the infirmary had a new quiet. The immediate danger had receded into a slow, careful aftermath. Patients rested with clean dressings and clean linen. Brother Anselm sat at a table and wrote down every name he had gathered. He made a list of damaged beds, of jars returned, of Marjorie's confessions and Brother Martin's admissions. He crossed each line with a pen as if crossing a small map to be repaired. Sister Maud placed a fresh cloth over Thomas S. brow and smoothed his hair with a precise motion. He opened his eyes and found them. "Sister Maud," he whispered. "Thank you." She answered with a small, steady, "Rest now, Thomas." She tied the bandage with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice and a practical tenderness. The prior convened a small inquiry. Marjorie agreed to return stolen coin and to post a public note at her stall promising to label goods. Brother Martin agreed to appear before his superior and to accept penance for being moved to trade. The ledger was copied and handed to the town's agent. The prior arranged for a patrol of the wharf for the coming week. Each public action repaired trust in increments. At noon, Anselm walked the ward and felt the binding of things. A storeroom sealed, jar rim scrubbed, a ledger carried to authority, Brother Martin's penance accepted. The emotion that had driven him at first, suspicion, had moved him through urgency, then to alarm, and finally to a steady resolve to protect the sick and the monastery's trust. The shifts had been visible in his hands. The clenched rosary, the evening grip on the intruder's wrist, the slow writing at dawn. He called Sister Maud to the doorway. "Sister Maud, sit with Thomas while I fetch the key," he said. "I will take the ledger to the prior and return with patrol's plan." She nodded and sat. She folded her hands and resumed humming as she smoothed Thomas's blanket. Her voice had the calm of one whose work rises out of need. As Anselm closed the storeroom door, he placed the key into the iron ring and set it on the table beside the token and the ledger. He looked at the token one last time and then at the jars, and he set the key in the center of the table as if it were a small, practical promise. A knock came at the outer door, the prior's messenger returning with a list of patrols and a quiet instruction. Brother Anselm took the paper and folded it into his habit pocket. The chapter closed in a concrete action. Brother Anselm walked back to the ward, set the ledger in the prior's hands, and said, "Lock the storeroom. Post a guard at the corridor. See that Marjorie's note is placed at market first light." The prior nodded and stepped away to begin the work. Anselm turned to Sister Maud and to Thomas. He spoke no long reflection. His choices had already created their consequence. He lit another small candle, placed it near the rosary, and sat to write the day's entries, while the ward kept its steady, human breathing around him.